Hello, Vanessa.
Hello, Cara.
Vanessa, I'm so excited about today's conversation because it's a flashback to my clinical days in many ways. And yet it's so relevant to the tween and teen experience that we get tons of incoming about all of the things that we're going to cover today. And so it's sort of what's old is new again, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we were inspired to do this episode. We had a meeting with a school administrator and we were talking to him about our curriculum. And he's been teaching health and sex ed for many years and has like a really deep well of experience and is super excited to work with us, which is actually really, really nice. And he said to us, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe I spent an hour with one of my classes last week talking about ingrown hairs and stretch marks." And it was like, we felt so seen.
I was like, oh my God, can I be in that class?
I know you. I like Cara's
talking
face
about
lit
stretch
up.
marks.
She's like, ingrown hairs and stretch marks.
At which point, I think that was the point where he was like, do you have content that covers this? And I said, well, we've written about a little this, that, and the other. And you and I looked at each other. We're like, we've got to record a podcast about this right now.
And we do
so
have,
here we are.
One of our animated characters is an ingrown hair that can't find its way out of the skin. It's in our curriculum.
Yeah, and on social. You can find that character on our Less Awkward channel.
What that character is called.
I can't either, but he's strumming a banjo. It's an ingrown hair that has lost its way and it's super mellow and it's just hanging out and playing a banjo.
I forgot about the banjo. Funny. That's so on point.
It's so perfect. So we're going to cover it. Just to arm you with knowledge and information about why stretch marks form and what you can do about them. Frankly, this is true for people of all ages. And then the related topic of keloids. Keloids is a biggie for people who have experienced them. If you don't know what a keloid is, this is going to be a great piece of this podcast to listen to because you can know what to look for and you can have answers to the questions you don't even know you have yet at the ready. And then we will land on ingrown hairs and what to do and how to manage them. And by the way, this is a great episode to share with kids who are going through all sorts of body changes because with stretch marks and keloids in particular, they may not believe you and what you have to say if you are not a trained healthcare provider, specifically a dermatologist. My children did not believe what I had to say because I was not a trained dermatologist. So, but they may be willing to listen to us. And we, of course, base all of our information in science.
And the reason these topics are important, so stretch marks, keloids, and ingrown hairs, two of these three things are such biggies because they're permanent in some way or another. And all of these things are related to bodies that are in flux. And this stage of life, it's not just puberty. People experience these things. I mean, pregnancy is another moment. Bodies that are gaining and losing weight throughout the life cycle is another place where some of these things come up. Obviously, new hair growth and adrenarche, ingrown hairs becomes the star of the show. So it's not just the really interesting and important science. It's also about recognizing the ways in which these experiences and these physical markers are representative of a larger kind of life transition. And so we'll get to that at the end, but really we want to dig into how and why and where these things happen and how common they are.
So here we go. We're starting with stretch marks. The ubiquitous stretch mark. Did you know, Vanessa, that close to 80% of all people get stretch marks on their hips? All people. I think people think this is a female thing. up to 80% of people get stretch marks on their hips, and somewhere between 50 and 80% get stretch marks on their breasts. At the risk of oversharing, because you know me, I'm not the one of the two of us that tends to overshare. I can remember like it was yesterday, the minute I saw a stretch mark on my body when I was a tween. It was terrifying to me. I didn't know what it was. I had stretch marks in both places, and they can look, if you're wondering what they look like, they can actually range in their appearance. But generally speaking, these are lines that they look like, literally like you took saran wrap and you pulled it really hard on two sides, and then you let go, and the middle gets a little floppy where the material was pulled and then relaxed. That is the general appearance of a stretch mark on most skin. It is usually linear, sometimes straight, sometimes not. It usually appears at first with some discoloration. It could be pink, it could be red, it could be brown, it could be blue, it could be purple. It all depends upon what your underlying skin tone is, and also where the stretching is happening and why. And in some people, they are raised. That is what I remember the most. Was I woke up, I had a red raised. It looked like I don't know, a wolf had come in the middle of the night and scratched me with talons across my hips. And there were these raised long lines. But for some people, they're flat. For some people, they're indented, right? So they can look a whole bunch of different ways. But here's what's happening that explains why they look how they look. When skin stretches quickly in one direction, think about that pulling of saran wrap, the tissue, the dermis of the skin actually thins in the other direction, in the perpendicular direction. So if you grow tall quickly and you go through a growth spurt where your height is going up quickly, your stretch mark will be horizontal. It'll be perpendicular because the stretch is happening sort of down towards your feet and up towards your head. And it's the mark is marking that vertical stretch. So the stretch marks appear horizontal. Likewise, if your hips grow very quickly wide in width, then your stretch mark might appear vertical. So it's all about where the skin is being pulled and how, and the mark comes up perpendicular to the direction of the force. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you might have a kid with stretch marks on their lower back, who's growing up, right? And the skin on the back is having to quickly accommodate the height growth.
And those can look horizontal.
And those would look horizontal. You might have kids who are gaining weight through backs and shoulders. So you might see stretch marks along the sort of like under the arm, around that side of the back. I mean, I have a garden of stretch marks around my hips and tush.
Garden.
I do. It's a veritable, as you would say, it's a veritable buffet of stretch marks. And, you know, for those of us who were pregnant, had stretch marks either along the sides of our stomachs or along our stomach. So you might have perpendicular, you might have a horizontal or vertical. And then, you know, with breasts that grow quickly, either, you know, through puberty or pregnancy, or in my case, shrink quickly after breastfeeding. It's all over the body. Some people have them on their calves, right? As calves grow in size, but also legs are growing longer. I mean, it's really kind of fascinating. I wish, Cara, we could go back, change the way the world treats stretch marks. Like, I wish they could be badges of honor and pride and beauty as signs of growing as human beings, right? Wouldn't that be nice if that's how it is? And I think we all have a chance to reframe some of these body changes in our own families, but
one can hold out hope.
One can hold out hope. But as you mentioned, part of the fear or the worry, in your case, the sort of like real worry is like, we don't know about them, or they're a shock or a surprise. And we're going to talk about it in the context of stretch marks, but that's true of any body changes that we aren't told or taught about, that we are so often concerned. Kids are so often concerned that there's something wrong with them.
Right. I mean, yes, right? They think there's something wrong. Let's just round out a little more science behind what's causing them, because it will help you understand the evolution of these marks, because that then feeds into the conversation about how to talk to a kid about them. Because this is an example, stretch marks are an example of a conversation that does not sound like they're going to be gone in a couple of days, right? They're not going to be gone in a couple of days. And in fact, many last a lifetime. And they are those badges of honor, as you described, Vanessa. But they change over time. So I just want to explain a teeny bit more science. Bear with me. For those of you who aren't into the science, 30 seconds. So maybe 60. The issue that underlies the formation of stretch marks is that we need collagen in our skin in order to stretch. Everyone's heard about collagen. You might go to the supermarket and see collagen shots available in drink form. They don't work. You might see collagen supplements. They often don't work. But collagen helps make our skin elastic and stretchy. When there is less collagen, our skin is still asked to stretch when we grow, but it can't do it as gracefully. We also see thinning in certain proteins inside the dermis, the middle layer of the skin. And so the physical stretch that happens with a growth spurt or a curve growth spurt, breasts, hips, etc., that not only disrupts the proteins that are involved in stretching, but also, as you know, Dr. Vanessa, anytime there's disruption somewhere in the body, the immune system is called into action. There is an inflammatory response, and it is the inflammatory response that causes the discoloration. So what I saw on my hips when I was about 12 were these claw-like lines, the lines being caused by the disruption in the stretch of my skin, probably due to lack of collagen in the area. And then the redness was due to inflammation. What exacerbates stretch marks during puberty and also during pregnancy is both sex hormones like estrogen and the androgens like testosterone, but also naturally occurring steroids, and in particular, cortisol. So we know that cortisol causes the body to metabolize proteins more quickly. That includes the proteins in the skin like collagen that are very good for stretchiness. So yet another reason to help try to modulate your own cortisol response by having all sorts of self-care rituals in place, not just beauty care, but actually calming your brain in order to calm your cortisol response. The last thing I'll add, and then I swear we're done with this very long 60 seconds of science, is that there are specific hormones during pregnancy that also impact the production of collagen. And so women will rub all sorts of things on their belly to try to increase the stretchiness of their skin. But at the end of the day, oftentimes it is the total hormonal load inside the body that's dictating whether or not there's enough of these proteins to allow the skin to stretch without having a mark.
Right. So the temptation as both as a person in ourselves and as a parent is to problem solve and to fix, right? As Cara mentioned, it's really tempting to say to a kid, it will all go away. It'll be fine. For those of us who've been living with stretch marks for, nearly 40 years, it doesn't go away. It does change color and it does lessen and you get used to it. But when our kids are worried or upset or in emotional pain, we want to solve it for them. And so we order things online and we take them to pharmacies and we go to dermatologists and we do all sorts of things in the hope of fixing it. And to Cara's point, yeah, there may be some things that help a bit, and there may be wisdom in getting insight from someone who's not you about how permanent or fixable these kinds of things are. But this is also a moment, and I wish I had a better answer from the non-medical side of things. This is also a moment to say, hey, there's always going to be things about our bodies that we don't love or that we have to get used to, or when our bodies change in ways that make us feel self-conscious, that's really hard. I get that it is really hard to have these new marks on your body that you don't love. And I can't fix them for you. And we can figure out ways to take good care of our skin and ourselves and all of those things. But this is one I can't fix for you. And it is the hardest thing to say to a kid about anything that they are upset about. I can't fix this for you. So that's the tricky thing when there are some things you can do that aren't 100% fixes or help.
They're not even 90%
right.
or 80% fixes.
They help a little bit, but you're not sure how much. It's not like they have strep throat and you take them to the doctor and they get an antibiotic and they're better. It's Cara, what's an analogy? I don't even know what an analogy for this is.
Right. I mean, this is why this is such an important conversation. These are very singular in that it's something that shows up on the body that nobody really wants or likes, and it's never going away. Balding. I guess balding, but even that has become cool now.
And also you
shave
can
your head and it's cool.
Right. Or you can take hair loss stuff and it helps somewhat.
Yeah, this is different. There's very little analogous material here, but you're not left with zero things to do. So I want to give you a few things. If you've got a kid who's just cannot hear, there's nothing I can do. Let's talk about how to feel better about yourself, which is a really hard conversation. There are things you can try. And frankly, you can try these for yourself too. Remember, the stretch mark itself is from disrupted proteins. The redness is from inflammation. The redness or purplish or blueness, that should fade over time. It doesn't always, but it should. But some of these treatments speak more to inflammation, and some of these treatments speak more to the disruption underneath. Quite frankly, if you're trying to treat the inflammation, sooner is better than later. Said another way, Vanessa, you are out of luck. I cannot help you 30 years later.
I've tried everything.
So there are some things you can do, and I'll share what I did. And then disappointingly, first of all, I knew this from life experience, but when I was reviewing for this episode, all of my lived experiences were confirmed. What I did not work. Mm-hmm. But here we go. So the things that people hear about are smoothing the area, rubbing the area with things like cocoa butter, vitamin E, or glycolic acid. I followed the advice of, I don't know who it was. I don't think it was a dermatologist, and there was no TikTok, so who knows? But I used to pop open a vitamin E capsule every night. I used to use the capsules, not the oil in a bottle, because I remember reading that when you open the top of a vitamin E oil bottle, oxygen gets in, and the more oxygen that gets in, the weaker the vitamin E oil becomes. So if you just pop a little gel cap, it's sort of fresh and not exposed to oxygen. And I used to pop one every night, and I would very carefully, like I was drawing with a pen, I would squeeze the vitamin E oil along the length of each stretch mark, and I would try to get the vitamin E to absorb. Anyone who has ever used vitamin E on their body knows exactly what happened next, which is I did it right before bed. My pajamas were covered with vitamin E oil. My sheets were covered with vitamin E oil. It was a mess, and it didn't really help very much.
And when I had Mohs surgery on my face, I did use vitamin E on my scar every night. I did not gently, I rubbed the hell out of the vitamin E along the scar to help with the inflammation. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to this. Along with 400 other things that I did. Literally, my husband would just stand there every night and watch me. He's like, God, you're so good about taking care of this. I'm like, yes, well, it is a massive scar on my face. So I'm kind of motivated. But, who knows if it helped, if it didn't help. Cara, just the act of bringing moisture and rubbing an inflamed and raised part of the skin. What does that do?
It can help in some skin types, and it doesn't help in others. And we're going to get to keloids in a second. But for people who keloid, probably that disruption does not help. The darker your skin, the more likely you are to keloid. And we'll talk about that in a second. We should mention here, stretch marks appear on every color skin. And the way they appear looks different across all bodies and across all skin tones. But the one thing that's pretty uniform is that stretch marks have this weird shininess to them.
Yeah, it's like a shimmer, like a silvery quality.
Yeah, it's silvery. And it looks that way on the lightest skin and on the darkest skin. And the inflammation is what shows up differently on different skin tones. Right?
It's actually, I'm going to bring in some really important life experience here. I was watching Love Island with my kids last night, and it was Megan Thee Stallion was there as a guest, and she had the women wearing her swimwear line. So all the swim suits were up their butts, right? So their full butt cheeks were showing. And then there was a competition where they were doing all sorts of twerking and dancing and stuff where they had to shake their butts. And the camera...
Family fun was had by all.
The Bennetts, no one can accuse the Bennetts of not being really classy. And the camera would sort of get up close to their butts while they were twerking and in this competition. And I was trying really hard not to be like my mother, which was we used to just kick her out of the room because she was so annoying to watch these dumb shows with. So I was trying to be chill, and my kids were like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I was really fascinated because there were people on the show the cameras were up close. They were wearing bathing suits, basically thong bathing suits up their butts, and you could see all of their stretch marks. And I didn't hear a single person in this show talk about being self-conscious or that they were proudly exhibiting their tushies.
And
I was like,
so
God
progress,
bless you. Yeah,
right?
I was really blown away. So
my grandmother would not say progress, but I think to your point of confidence and beauty standards, that's awesome. Also, that's not what we were watching last night. That's as much as I can
contribute to this episode, Cara.
So let's get to therapies and what people can do for those who are just enough already, guys. We know the conversations are hard, but what can we do? So you can try to address the inflammation and also, and this is the most important, help stimulate collagen growth in order to rebuild the skin. Now, as you can imagine, the closer in time to the appearance of the stretch mark, the more likely this treatment will work. Because if you've had 40 years of collagen disruption and then you try to stimulate collagen growth, God bless, good luck.
Right.
So the first category of treatments are the retinoids, the vitamin A derivatives. They help rebuild collagen, right, in the skin, in the dermis. The second category is light or laser therapy, which stimulates collagen growth. And the third is microneedling, which also stimulates collagen growth. I will say that some of these work for some skin better than others. Some don't work at all on some skin. Some have their own complicating side effects. Someone who responds to microneedling by being highly irritated and inflamed, it's not going to do well. Laser and light therapy is very puzzling to me, Vanessa, and will always be. We've talked about this in other episodes, but I am both fascinated by the data and confused by the data, because these same energy waves that we are quick to call out as causes of everything from wrinkles to cancer are also therapeutic. Now, it's different wavelengths, it's different delivery devices, it's different distances, it's different scenarios, all the things. But I just find it fascinating. And I think if I ever go get a master's in something, it's going to be a master's in what the actual happens with these various light frequencies and how do they impact our bodies, pro and con, because it's really complicated stuff. And a long way of saying, I don't know what the long-term consequences are, but they look right now, light and laser therapy are all the rage, and they look really restorative.
Yeah. I mean, on this very scar that I had was initially rubbing vitamin E and Aquaphor and all this stuff, ultimately, and this was covered by insurance.
Right.
I had the scar lasered about 12 weeks after my Mohs surgery and reconstruction, like plastic surgery for the incision, because I had like a dime size hole on my face. And then I think about a year later, I did microneedling again as a way to work on the scar. I will tell you, it's very unpleasant, even after having been numbed, and it doesn't feel great. And your skin is really pretty raw afterwards. Now, I feel super lucky that whatever it was of all these various things that I did and the doctors recommended I do ended up working really well. And I feel grateful to that. But I can't say as an N of one and not a scientist, I can only speak from personal experience.
Well, I will say that your personal experience tracks. You had people doing these treatments who knew what they were doing. My biggest concern is that someone who's listening to this episode is going to jump on Amazon and buy a home laser and think that they can treat their kids' stretch marks with a home laser that is either so low power it is safe in anyone's hand but doesn't do anything, or the converse, which can cause all sorts of complications if you don't know what you're doing.
Right. I mean, these two things I did in the hands of dermatological surgeons. It was deliberative and thoughtful, and I did it in the doctor's office. And even then, I wasn't prepared for what it would feel like or what how my skin would look afterwards. Like there's all sorts of questions that I wish I had known to ask. How much pain will I be in? How raw will my skin look afterwards? Will there be scabbing? Like all of those things. So if you are considering taking a kid to address some of these things or yourself, I found the dermatologist to be quick to get me out of the office and on to their next person. And I wish I had sort of prepared more with questions and also been more forthright or sort of forceful in getting my questions answered and not allowing myself to be sort of shepherded quickly out of the room. So that's where I would have done things differently, is just had more information at my disposal.
And before we close out on stretch marks, just a note that these are not unique to adolescence. So people can gain stretch marks throughout life. The most common scenarios when that happens are after periods of rapid weight gain. So pregnancy is one example, but there are lots of scenarios in which someone will gain weight quickly and their skin will need to stretch to accommodate. And then there are a lot of underlying health conditions that either cause rapid weight gain and or just cause stretch marks. And if you want to have an argument at your disposal for why your kid should not use anabolic steroids, Vanessa, stretch marks. So this is an example, some of it because of quick bulking up, but some of it because the steroids themselves work like cortisol, the corticosteroids inside the body, and they make the disruption in the layer of the skin a little more common. So, if you're thinking about going on an anabolic steroid, Vanessa, in order to bulk up, I got another reason why you shouldn't, and that's more stretch marks.
And just how widespread steroid use is, how normalized it's become for kids. Two of my boys were having a conversation about Reacher, the show on Amazon, and they were sort of casually discussing how it's well known that the star of the show uses steroids and kind of like which ones he admits to using and which ones he doesn't. And what does that mean? And I was like sitting there. It's like one of those moments where you're like, just keep your mouth shut, just keep your mouth shut, keep listening, keep listening. And I was totally blown away by how normalized it was and how much they knew about steroids. And then the older one was telling the younger one, like, dude, this is why you don't do it. And here's what's probably going on in that guy's life that you don't see when you watch the TV show. Like it was really, really fascinating.
Fascinating.
And so for people who are like, my kid would never, anytime you say to yourself, my kid would never, that's like a red flag.
Gigantic red flag.
Any kid might ever do something. But yes, the thing they're trying to change their appearance in one way, they may not be aware of the side effects of appearance changing in other ways.
So Vanessa, let's do a few minutes on keloids. And these are different from stretch marks, but you're going to see why it's important to go from one conversation to the next. A lot of the underlying mechanics are similar. So stretch marks happen because the skin stretches and proteins break. Keloids happen because the skin scars. So the skin is injured and then the immune system comes in and it forms a scar. And in response to the scar, the skin or the immune system within the skin kind of goes to 11 is the only way I can describe it. So what is a keloid? A keloid is a thick, kind of sometimes shiny like a stretch mark, usually hairless, almost always lumpy area of raised skin. If you get a cut on your arm and it keloids, the keloid usually runs the length of the cut, so it looks kind of linear, but it has this bumpiness to it. But if you get your ear pierced and get a keloid, we're going to talk about all the times that people who keloid get keloids. You can form like a massive, it almost looks like a piece of cauliflower is growing out of one side or the other of the earlobe. Keloids can be really big. They can be really dramatic. They can be soft. They can be firm. They can be rubbery. They usually look similar to the skin tone, but either darker or redder. Sometimes they have a purplish element to them, but they're in sort of in the family of the skin tone, usually a little bit more than a stretch mark, which can be very red. Keloids can be itchy, which makes them worse because if you scratch at them, the immune system is more triggered. They can be painful. Depending upon where they are, they can cause issues. Like if you get your ear pierced and you develop a big keloid and your lobe is now pushed in one direction or another, it can be hard to wear these beautiful headphones that I'm wearing right now. It can be hard, sort of, they can get in the way of life. Most common spots that they show up, earlobes, jaw, shoulders, cheeks, mid-chest. So you're kind of like thinking from the nose down to the nipple line. That's kind of the most common area. I've seen them everywhere. I've seen them head to toe. Some people get one. Most people who keloid in different places when their skin is disrupted. So if you're a person who's prone to keloids, when you get cut, you're going to probably keloid.
And what causes them, like not just a regular scar or some scar tissue or, a sort of, but what causes this sort of extra version?
Yeah. So keloids form when fibroblasts kind of come into the area inside the skin. So remember, the stretch mark is inside the dermis, the middle layer of the skin. Proteins are broken. Here, there are these cell types that come into the dermis, the middle layer of the skin, and they, like a little volcano, they kind of erupt up through the epidermis, the top layer of the skin. And then they have this very volcanic kind of appearance on the top. And then the inflammatory response is very chaotic, if you will. It's like, the inflammatory system is really trying to mop this up here. And instead of clearing things out, you get what's called hypertrophy. You get excess skin and fibroblast growth. And then it sort of kind of raises itself out of the skin. I don't want to downplay how significant keloids are, especially when kids first start getting them. Stretch marks make you feel self-conscious, but they tend to be in spots that we tend to cover with clothes. Keloids can show up anywhere. So if you get keloids and you get acne that is bad enough to cause some scarring, you can keloid wherever the acne comes up. Bug bites can keloid. Chickenpox marks can keloid. A cut or a burn, as we talked about. Piercing, ear piercing. This was the one where I remember the first time I saw a keloid from ear piercing, and here this kid had gone. This was such a big deal to her. She was getting her ears pierced. This was so exciting for her. And not only did she keloid, but now she could never get her ears pierced. And she had to manage this healing gone wrong on her ears. And we're going to talk about it in a second, but as you can imagine, you can't just cut off a keloid because it's the issue with keloids is how your skin heals, right? Tattoos can keloid. Fascinating. Shaving nicks can keloid, and surgical incisions. So surgeons, especially plastic surgeons, will often go into deep detail trying to get a history of whether or not your skin keloids. Because if you're going to a plastic surgeon to try to minimize a scar and you haven't shared with them that you scar in a keloid way, their job becomes ever more difficult.
Is it genetic? Like, what causes some people to keloid and others not to?
Yeah, I mean, people with a family history of keloids do tend to keloid more often. The darker your skin, the more likely it is to keloid. So a lot of the data suggests that people of African and Asian and Hispanic descent are more likely to keloid. I have seen keloids on every skin color. I think that what was interesting to me when I was doing the research is that keloids pop up most commonly between the ages of 10 and 30. Which is something I had not realized, but it actually makes sense to me because this is when the skin is turning over so rapidly, right? This is when, so if you've already got rapid turnover and then you've got cell growth on fuel, then, right, you
And
keloid.
is it related? I mean, do you think, because we talked about stretch marks and the hormonal relationship there, is it related to hormones?
Probably, because pregnant people are more likely to keloid and people in the midst of puberty are more likely to keloid. This is something where if you're listening and you're wondering, do I have a kid who keloids? You will know the answer to that question. If you're wondering, the chances are you don't. Keloids are not subtle and they show up. You can talk to your kid about them. You can explain what they are. I would not do a Google image search because there are very dramatic pictures of keloids and it will freak kids out, especially if they do keloid and they think this is going to happen to me. And the approach to keloids is really different than the approach to stretch marks. So that's another thing. This is one where, yeah, you might have the conversation that lands with, there's nothing I can do about it. If you get a cut, your skin keloids, that's the reality. However, there are a lot of techniques that are effective against keloids, at least partially effective. Injecting them with steroids can really help. Laser therapy can really help. Cryotherapy, freezing off keloids, can help. Pressure therapy that stops the mound of extra cells from growing through from the dermis to the epidermis can really help. I cannot emphasize enough, you must see someone who knows what they're doing here. This is not one that we mess around with keloids, because these scars, the bigger and lumpier and more involved they get, the more sort of literally emotionally scarring they are, the more challenging they are to treat. There are people who specialize in managing keloids. But if you have a kid who keloids, tell them not to ever get tattoos. Tell them, try to, more than any other kid, try to stop picking acne, keep their hands off their face, all the things, because the consequences for them are different, frankly. They're just different.
And that's a hard conversation to have.
It's so hard.
Hey, kiddo, it applies differently for you. And I wish it was different, but it's not. Again, these are tough conversations. Cara's point for this one is just emphasizing, because when kids get worried about stuff and they get stressed, they sometimes take things into their own hands. It's hard for them to wait for the doctor's appointment. They feel like you're not taking it seriously. I mean, I had a plantar wart on my foot when I went to summer camp. And let's just say the way I dealt with it was not how we would recommend dealing with it on this podcast. And that was something on the bottom of my foot. It was not something on my face or my ear or my leg, right? And kids get really, really stressed. And so we have to be in constant conversation, hey, I know this is hard. We have an appointment. Stick with me here. Let's keep talking about it. But please don't do anything on your own. Don't go with your friend somewhere to try to deal with it. Don't try things secretly that you see on TikTok. This is serious, and we got to use a trained medical professional.
Vanessa, we're going to land on a more fun one because it's temporary. We're not talking about scars that last your whole entire life. We're going to talk about ingrown hairs. And if you're wondering, what does ingrown hairs have anything to do with stretch marks and keloids? I would say the theme of this episode is sort of skin offenses, if you will. It's not acne, but it's the other giant bucket of things that offend kids that happen to their skin. And ingrown hairs are as universal, probably more universal than stretch marks. I mean, I think the data's got to show that we're north of 80% of all people who get ingrown hair. You know a lot about why ingrown hairs form. Would you like to describe why they form?
So it's so funny because I keep thinking about our little character who can't find his way out of the hair follicle. So for those of you, we have a hair episode, hair growth and removal. We have all sorts of skin episodes, but essentially the skin follicle is shaped like a chemistry flask, and it's bulbous in the bottom, like the bottom of a flask, and it's narrow up top. And in each of those follicles, a hair can grow. And during adrenarche, either new hair grows in those follicles, and that hair is thicker, or hair that had already been growing in that follicle changes shape and thickness and becomes thicker. So something thicker going through the thin flask-like top is going to have a harder time finding its way out than a very fine hair. On top of that, the places where that hair grows, like on the groin, under the arms, around, the tush, or around the ankles or shins, those are places where either they're moist and there's more sweat and there's less chance to air out and there's more friction, right? So there's friction under the underwear, there's friction at the sock line, there's friction around a waistband. And that friction can also make it hard for the hair. And I keep doing this little sort of
spiral in the air.
Spiral with my finger to find its way out.
That's right.
And here's the other thing that's hard about that. And then, Cara, we can talk about how to handle it, is that it's also in places we don't always see in our kids' bodies anymore, right?
Yeah.
If they're getting private, if they're growing hair in those places, if they're not running around nude anymore, we actually don't know they're there. And our kids may have ingrown hairs, little ingrown hairs, like you can see on the face when they start to shave and the hair can't find its way out. But there may be more serious ingrown hairs in places that we don't see. And that is more of a concern.
I mean, I think managing an ingrown hair is a lot like managing a kid in parenting. For the most part, when they can't find their way, if you leave them alone and you just make sure they're safe, they'll get there eventually. But every once in a while, you got a kid who just can't see the forest for the trees, and they are just wandering and they are a little lost, either physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it is, in school, on a field, doesn't matter. And suddenly they have spun themselves into a tizzy and they can't get out. Well, that is the same as the ingrown hair. And what happens in the body is that the immune system, which we've been talking about this entire episode, swings into action. It sees a foreign body that's now clogging the pore. And it's like, I can help out. I can get rid of this foreign body. And so it sends in a lot of its inflammatory chemicals and cells in order to mop up the situation, which just creates more swelling inside the pore. And we know that when the pore is clogged and the swirling, ever-growing, ingrown hair clogs that pore from the inside, then those inflammatory cells can't get out and everything gets congested and backs up.
And again, this might be a moment where a kid notices something on their body and decides to take it into their own hands, literally.
And fair enough, because I mean, I'm here to say anyone who has had a pimple-like lump on their body that turns out to be an ingrown hair, where when the pus comes out or the white blood cells come out, so too does a big long hair. There is a degree of satisfaction to that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm just saying, I'm just owning. So the reality is that most of these do resolve on their own. However, the hair can get quite stuck, especially if it's very thick or very curly. And then you can end up getting an infected follicle. It's called folliculitis. And it can, I mean, I've seen pretty darn infected follicles on account of ingrown hairs.
Right. So my recommendation from a sort of conversational standpoint, not a medical standpoint, is, well, first of all, if you see one of those, go see your pediatrician or go see your dermatologist. Like this
Yeah,
is,
I mean, if it looks gnarly.
if
yes.
it looks gnarly, but
if it doesn't look gnarly, just throw a warm compress on it and see if that helps let the hair find its way.
right. But if you're noticing that this is happening over and over with a kid, there may be some lifestyle changes that need to happen with that kid that can help prevent either.
That's right.
You can't prevent it from happening at all. We all get ingrown hairs at some point or another, but the severity and the frequency, it's not necessarily a hygiene thing. Like it's not that they're dirty, although they might be. But it's really about sort of recognizing what are the forces at work that causes the ingrown hair and what are the things that they can do to deal with it. And that is in one conversation. And it's not one conversation when they're 12. Skincare is like ongoing, multiple, increasingly sophisticated conversations. So, Cara, what are the things to let them know about and to be on them about in our totally cool, chill, non-invasive, annoying way to address?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm never annoying. So the word of the week here is exfoliator or exfoliate. Kids know all about exfoliation. right? They really do. Even kids who are not on social media watching skincare routines have heard about exfoliation. This is a real shift from when we were growing up. But the importance of exfoliation when it comes to
known
ingrown
as the
hairs,
Noxzema and Seabreeze days.
yes, I can feel that like minty freshness right now.
It.
As
I
you
can
say
smell the hair in my nostrils burning from the scent of Seabreeze.
Gosh, so funny. But it's important to sort of for us to recognize and own that exfoliation is the name of the game. So helping to lift the debris and the dead skin cells and everything else off the top of the pore openings so that there's some room for that hair to find its way. There's less resistance at the top of the pore and the hair can eventually arc out. That's the name of the game in terms of both prevention and management of early ingrown hairs. Exfoliation can be done mechanically, like with a loofah, or chemically using their exfoliator pads. A lot of them are designed for young skin that basically have ingredients in them that help dissolve the dead skin cells off the skin or help kids wipe them off a little bit more effectively. But notice I didn't say aggressively. Aggressive exfoliation can really irritate skin. And the irony there is if you aggressively exfoliate and you irritate your skin, the immune system is further stimulated and you can wind up in another few days or weeks with more ingrown hairs because you just don't want to trigger the immune system in the skin any more than necessary.
And if you have a kid getting ingrown hairs along the underwear line or bathing suit line or kind of waistband, if you have someone growing hair kind of up their tush and back for the first time or down the thighs, and they're playing sports or dancing or swimming in times when they're in wet clothing that has friction and is rubbing up against the hair follicles in moist, hairier scenarios. Anyone nauseous yet?
You want to throw in 12 more adjectives?
So in that case, and this is one that takes a little forward planning and a little help on the executive functioning side. It means they've got to bring like dry clothes to change into after sports or after going to the beach. They may need different kinds of underwear, maybe moving from like a synthetic material to an all cotton material, maybe shifting up where the waistband sits on their bodies. Like there's a lot of just very tactical ways that they can help. Cara, what about with shaving and ingrown hairs?
I mean, that's where I wanted to go, which is if you've got really thick, curly facial hair coming in, those follicles often get plugged with ingrown hairs. And young men who are starting to grow beards or who don't want to grow beards and are shaving their beards and mustaches, and they have really, really curly hair, they can be really frustrated by this because they get these little, they look like whiteheads at first because the hair is sort of stuck and you can see a little white bump. And then it can eventually look like cysts or like acne, but it's ingrown hair. And there are a lot of places that you can go for really good recommendations. I would absolutely have a dermatologist take a look and help come up with a routine that works, but it for sure involves warmer water on the beard and mustache area before shaving, often shaving after a warm bath or shower, because that opens up the pore. It opens and it allows, when you use a razor, it allows for that. The pore opens, everything relaxes and comes out. You can end up with serious infections on the face if you shave across already inflamed or irritated skin. So that you want to get help from someone who cares for skin.
And that's true. Bikini line, underarms.
All of it. Yep. All of it.
All of it. Popping or picking ingrown hairs.
I mean, look, our party line is don't pop, don't pick. But I'm not going to lie. When an ingrown hair comes out, it is very satisfying and problem is usually solved. It does not mean you won't scar. And to the whole theme of this particular episode, we're trying to avoid permanent skin damage. that will scar, keloid, stretch, all the things. So don't pick, but if you pick and a giant hair comes out in addition to some white blood cells, you have your answer. The underlying cause was an ingrown hair, and hopefully it will not lose its way again.
So hopefully people were listening to this episode with like, a big bowl of cottage cheese, or I don't know, something like really nice and white and creamy as they listen to this conversation.
Oh my God, Vanessa, you went there.
Sorry, it's so gross. This was so interesting. I'm actually so excited to send this to the teacher now, because then he can share it with all the parents of the kids in the class he was teaching. Thank you, Cara.
Aw, thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.